Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Please make sure to like the video and hit the subscribe button. We are on a mission to hit 10,000 followers by the end of the year. Now let's get into the video. The topic for today is going to be people in their 40s and 50s with no children. How does it feel? Story 1. I kind of feel like it's as if I walked into a life where I wasn't supposed to be here. I was supposed to be somewhere else with different types of creatures. I don't feel like there's something wrong with me, more that I just don't fit in. I don't feel bad about it, but I definitely feel alienated from my own kind, because a major life goal and desire is just not there for me. It's like if everyone was part of a cult that believed smearing poop on themselves was the best thing ever, and I'm just like, ew, why would you do that? Story 2. Honestly, it's sort of sad, but not overwhelming. I was always ambivalent about having kids. I would have been up for it if my partner wanted them, but he didn't, and I was fine not having them. Now that I'm in my early 40s, it's weird to realize that window is probably closed. I still don't feel strongly about it, but there's some kind of grief. It's more grief over losing the potential than actually wanting kids. Story 3. I think there is grief involved with that window closing for a woman. It's just something you always thought you could do. And now that you probably really can't, it's understandable there is some grief in that. Having kids just seemed irresponsible for me due to health issues and not great financial circumstances. Story 4. This is a great articulation of the grief I've been feeling as well. My ex and I were on the verge of trying for kids before a gut-wrenching divorce 5 years ago. I assumed if it was meant to be, I'd find another partner and still have time. But that window is closing, and it's not something I feel strongly enough about to do on my own. It's like missing the boat on things you never really wanted, but recognize you can't have anymore. Story 5. I never envisioned a time where I would have kids. I grew up in a noisy house with too many people crammed into a small space. I've been surrounded by kids and spent a lot of my life looking after other people. Now, I go on decent holidays, I'm free on weekends, and I love the peace and quiet. I'm very happy in my own company, and I don't believe I would have made a good parent. Story 6. It's weird because all your child-having friends are completely consumed by their kids, so you don't relate as well with others. But I have extra money and time to do whatever I want. But sometimes I want to do something with my best friend, but she can't because of her kid. So there are positives and negatives. Story 7. I became unexpectedly single at 37, and I always assumed I'd have kids. I wanted them, but I was content between relationships, so I didn't feel the push to hunt for a partner. Now I'm 47, and there's always that curiosity about how things might have been different if I'd made it a priority. If you don't end up having kids, I hope you find peace and make the most of the child-free lifestyle. Story 8. I wanted children, but my uterus decided otherwise. I sometimes grieve the idea of being a parent. Then I snap back to reality, knowing that I couldn't provide what I feel is a fulfilling life for a child. I'm on disability for MS, legally blind, and I depend on others for basic things. I get to sleep in, love my cats, and be the weird aunt instead. Story 9. Kinda depressing, honestly. I want to be a dad, but I'd rather let my broken brain diseases die off with me. It's hard to imagine kids going through what I go through. I want to be a parent, but I'd feel guilty knowing I might pass this down. Story 10. It's more the grief of losing the choice to time rather than the grief of not having kids. I was always content with the idea of not having them. But now that I'm in my early 40s, it's weird to realize that I probably won't have kids. It's like a door closing slowly on a future that could have been. Story 11. After numerous miscarriages, we were in our 40s with no children. We would both do anything to have had children, but if we had a kid now, I'd be 68 when they graduated from high school. It's heartbreaking, but we've found some peace. Story 12. It's been soul-crushing. I have freedom, but watching my wife struggle has been the worst part. Having and raising kids is all she ever wanted, and I haven't been able to give her that. We're hoping to adopt, but it's an incredibly lonely and vulnerable experience, especially if you aren't going through a religious agency. Story 13. I wanted to have kids, but I couldn't, so sometimes I feel sad seeing friends and colleagues having children. But it's nothing I can change, so I usually don't think much about it. Sometimes, I'm glad I don't have kids, seeing how the world is going. Story 14. When you're sitting on the fence, it's the difference between getting shoved off the fence before you're ready and getting off yourself. I feel grief over the closing of one more possible future than it is over not having kids specifically. Story 15. As someone who has wanted to have children but has fertility issues, it's been soul-crushing. Watching my wife, who always wanted kids, struggle with this has been the hardest part. We're hoping to adopt, but it's a lonely process, especially outside religious agencies. Story 16. I always felt that way. And many years later, I still feel that way. I've never regretted being childless. I just wish society understood that it's not negative. Story 17. I'm 39 and feel the same way. Right now, I don't want kids, but I've basically run out of time to meet a partner and have a lifestyle where parenthood makes sense, and there's some grief in losing the choice. Story 18. I love not having to prepare school lunches, going to kids' sporting events, or standing on the sidelines in the cold. I never dreamed of being a mother. I grew up in a noisy house with too many people, and I spent a lot of my life looking after others. I love the peace and quiet. Story 19. So thankful. I would have been a terrible mother, but I'm an amazing aunt. All my life I could barely take care of myself, so I'm happy not to bring harm to another life. Story 20. A few pangs every now and then, but I wouldn't change my decision. I've always enjoyed my freedom, and while I respect those who choose parenthood, I don't regret not taking that path. Story 21. I never had that burning desire. If I had a partner who wanted kids, I might have said yes. But that never happened, and I've enjoyed my freedom. I feel a bit sad about missing out on milestones my friends experience. Story 22. I can barely take care of myself, let alone have to take care of another living person. So I just do what I want with my life and have a great time. Story 23. Pretty rough. I started feeling better when I took full responsibility for choosing not to have children. My second husband is amazing but had a vasectomy and feels he's too old to adopt. I've fostered animals, and while it's not the same, you can't always get what you want. Story 24. Parents should really want their children. If you aren't all in, you'll have a hard time. Parenthood is not something you do lightly. It's a lifelong responsibility. Story 25. My husband and I travel to different countries 3 to 5 times a year, stay up until 3 a.m., watching movies, do staycations, buy what we want, and have the freedom to do as we please. Story 26. It's weird because all your child-having friends are consumed by their kids, so you don't relate as well with others. But I have extra money and time to do what I want. Sometimes I want to do something with my best friend, but she can't because of her kid. So there are positives and negatives. Story 27. I've been going through a mini crisis lately as everyone in my life is either pregnant or trying. I have a wonderful partner who also doesn't want kids, but it feels different as a woman. I feel so alone because there's no one in my life who relates. Your comment makes me feel less alone. Story 28. I don't feel the desire in any shape or form. The closest I feel is the wish to be a cool role model to a young person, but I certainly don't feel any desire to raise them from infancy. Story 29. My situation and thoughts are similar. I have health issues that seem genetic, and coupled with not great financial circumstances, having kids just seemed irresponsible. There may be a biological imperative to have kids, but my higher brain never felt strongly about it. Story 30. I feel this way too. It's a gut-level melancholy that the possibility has faded away, not actual grief over not having them. It's more of a low-burning grief as you age over possibilities that won't come to be. Story 31. I like my life and my freedom, but sometimes I feel sad about missing out on milestones my friends experience, like watching their kids grow up or having grandchildren. I'm 48 now, and that window has probably closed. Story 32. It's been soul-crushing. My wife has always wanted children, and I haven't been able to give her that. We're hoping to adopt, but it's a lonely experience, especially if you aren't going through a religious agency. Story 33. Totally this. It's not regret or a rising desire to have kids, but rather grief over the transition. I only started feeling this way after my ex and I broke up, which makes me suspect that it's more a fear of eventually being alone. Story 34. I often hear parents complain about making school lunches, which is not an issue for me. I never dreamed of being a mother, never played with dolls, and never envisioned having kids. I've been surrounded by kids my whole life, and I don't want to do that anymore. Story 35. Just remember, even parents can end up alone. My parents were amazing, but my older brother decided he didn't want to know us anymore, so I spend extra time with my folks to make up for it. Story 36. For a while, I was a fence sitter. It wasn't until I was 30 that I realized not having kids was a choice, not an inevitability. I was blessed with great parents, and my biggest fear about not having kids was fear of regret, which I realized wasn't enough reason to become a parent. Story 37. Same. It's always been inconceivable to me. Imagining myself as a mother seems actually hilarious. I'm 48, and I've never had the urge to have kids, even when others around me started families. Story 38. I always thought I would have kids eventually, but I was anxious every time I thought about how much my life would change. I'm so glad I never ended up having any. Story 39. I love not having kids. My spouse and I have pets, active social lives, and do whatever we want whenever we want. I love my friends and siblings' kids, but being a parent is not for me. Story 40. I'm happy. I love sleeping in late on Saturday mornings, not driving to kids' sporting events, and never having to stand on the sidelines in the cold and rain. I like my freedom, and I don't regret not having children. Story 41. We're dildos, dual income, little dog owners. No regrets. Story 42. As someone who has always wanted to have children but has fertility issues, it's been soul-crushing. Watching my wife, who always wanted kids, struggle with this has been the hardest part. Story 43. I have kids, but I also struggle with friends who are consumed by their own kids. It's annoying because I love my kids, but I don't want to talk about them constantly when I'm hanging out with friends. Story 44. I became unexpectedly single at 37. And I always assumed I'd have kids. I wanted them, but I was also pretty content between relationships. I just assumed I'd find a partner eventually, but now I'm 47, and it feels like a missed opportunity. Story 45. After decades of abuse from my mother, I've developed mental health issues and autoimmune diseases. I'm finally free of her, but I have no desire to continue the cycle of abuse by having children. Story 46. I want kids, but I can't imagine seeing them go through what I go through with my chronic mental and physical illnesses. Volunteering to help kids with homework has helped fulfill my nurturing side without having children of my own. Story 47. It's hard. I feel like I missed out on the best parts of adulthood, like first steps, taking my kid to school, family vacations, and dinner table conversations. It just never materialized for me, and it feels like I wasn't worthy of that gift. Story 48. I never had a burning desire for kids, and now that I'm in my 40s, that window is probably closed. I like my life, but sometimes I feel sad about missing out on milestones my friends get to experience. Story 49. I struggle with the holidays as someone without kids. They must be fun with children, but for me, they're just another day. It's a weird feeling of missing out on something that could have been. Story 50. Definitely no regrets. I've always struggled to take care of myself, so I never seriously considered having kids. I feel content with my decision and enjoy the freedom that comes with it.